Hey listeners, if you haven't already, join the family by subscribing so you never miss another one of these stories. Let's get to 1,000 subs together. Now relax and enjoy. Let me tell you about the place where I work. It's not a school, not in any way you would recognize. From the outside, it looks normal enough, a low brick building from the 70s surrounded by a chain link fence. The kind of place that just sinks into the background of any town. But the inside is something else. The rules are the first thing they give you, a single laminated card on your first day. No digital copy, nothing you can forward or save. Just this physical thing you have to keep on you at all times. The font is small and dense. The language is dry and bureaucratic, but the content is anything but. Rule 1. The clocks in the hallways are always wrong. Trust the clocks in the classrooms only if they are ticking. If a classroom clock is silent, do not look at it, and do not trust the time it displays. Rule 2. The children in room 101 bits do not have shadows. If you see a shadow attached to one of them, do not acknowledge it. Simply walk away and report it to the headmaster by writing a note on the green paper provided in the staff room drawer. Do not use blue paper. Rule 3. During fire drills, you must check that the shadow of the person next to you is pointing in the same direction as your own. If it is not, do not get in line with them. Find another group. There are dozens of these rules, some for specific days of the week, some for certain weather conditions, all of them utterly bizarre and non-negotiable. My first week was a blur of paranoid anxiety, my eyes constantly darting around trying to check a dozen impossible things at once. The veteran teachers moved through the halls with a quiet, weary efficiency, their faces set in neutral masks. They never talked about the rules, not directly. They just followed them with the grim determination of people who knew the price of forgetting. I learned quickly that questions were not welcome. The headmaster, a man named Mirkrum, with kind eyes and a perpetually tired smile, would just pat your shoulder and say it's all part of the procedure. Just follow the card and you will be fine. We have a perfect safety record, he would say. And it was true. There were never any accidents reported, no incidents in the news, but the other new hire from my group, a guy named Leo. He was gone by the third day. He thought the rules were a joke, a hazing ritual for new teachers. I saw him at lunch that second day laughing about Rule 15, which stated that if the water from the drinking fountain ever tasted sweet, you were to cease drinking immediately and rinse your mouth with the bottled water stored under the sink in the janitor's closet. He drank from the fountain and said it tasted like metal, like it always does. He was fine for the rest of the day. But the next morning, he didn't show up. When I asked Macrum about it, he just said Leo had decided the job was for him and wished him well in his future endeavors. But the look in his eyes wasn't one of well-wishing. It was one of pity, and the way the other teachers avoided the subject told me everything I needed to know. The rules were not a joke, so I learned. I kept my head down. I followed the card. I made it through the first month, then the second. The strangeness became routine, a new normal. I would calmly note that the child drawing in the corner of room 101 bits was indeed casting no shadow on the floor, and I would move on with my lesson on fractions. I would feel a sudden chill in the hallway, and without breaking stride, I would turn left towards the staircase instead of right towards the staff room, because Rule 8 clearly states that if a cold spot is encountered in the east wing corridor, between the hours of 10 and 2:1 must alter their route to avoid it. It was just part of the job. The pay was surprisingly good, enough to make the constant low-grade fear worth it. And the kids were mostly great, bright and funny, and seemingly oblivious to the weirdness that governed their school. They never mentioned the rules. They never talked about the things I sometimes saw from the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement where there shouldn't be one. A reflection in a window that showed an empty hallway behind me when I knew for a fact it was full of students. I started to get comfortable. That's the dangerous part. When you start to think you understand the place, when the fear fades into background noise. It happened on a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary overcast Tuesday. I was on lunch duty in the cafeteria, monitoring the rows of tables, The card was in my breast pocket like always, a constant weight against my chest. I was watching a group of fifth graders arguing over a trade of some kind of cards when I felt it. A shift in the air pressure, a sudden silence that fell over the entire room. It was that the kids stopped talking. They were still moving their mouths, still laughing, still arguing, but the sound just vanished, like someone had hit mute on the world. I looked around, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The other teacher on duty, Mrs. Gable, was staring at her watch, her face pale. She tapped the face of her watch, then looked at me, her eyes wide with a pure animal terror I had never seen before. She mouthed a word I couldn't hear. Then she turned and ran out of the cafeteria doors, abandoning her post, which was a direct violation of Rule 3. You never leave your post during an event. My mind was racing, scrambling through the mental index of the laminated card. What rule covered this, a sudden loss of sound? I couldn't think. The silent cacophony of the cafeteria was utterly unnerving. I saw a student drop a plastic tray. It hit the floor without a clatter, bouncing in perfect eerie quiet. Then I saw it, at the far end of the room, near the double doors that led to the kitchen. The air began to warp. It looked like heat haze off asphalt in the summer, but it was inside, in the cool cafeteria. It shimmered and twisted, and within that shimmer, something was moving. It was a shape, tall and impossibly thin, like a man stretched out on a rack. Its limbs were too long, its movements a series of jerky, unnatural angles. It didn't walk, it unfolded itself across the floor, and it was coming this way. The kids didn't see it. They continued their silent lunch, completely unaware of the thing gliding between the tables. My blood went cold. I fumbled for the card in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get it out. I scanned the dense text, my vision blurring. Rule 22. Rule 22. Where was it? The thing was getting closer, its head a featureless oblong that seemed to swivel slowly as it moved, taking in the room. I found it. Rule 22. In the event of an audio-temporal lapse, characterized by a cessation of ambient sound and visual distortion in the atmosphere, all personnel must assume a stationary position, close their eyes, and count backwards from 100 by increments of 7. Do not open your eyes until sound has returned. Do not interact with any entities perceived during this time. They are not real. I almost sobbed with relief. I slammed my eyes shut, standing right there in the middle of the cafeteria, and I started counting. 100, 93, 86. It was hard to concentrate. My mind screaming at me that there was a thing right there, that it was getting closer. I could feel a presence, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of emptiness, of a void. 79, 72. I could feel it right in front of me. I could smell something like ozone and old dust. 65, 58. A long cold finger seemed to trace the air just an inch from my forehead. I didn't open my eyes. I kept counting, my voice a raw whisper in the absolute silence. 51, 44, 37. The coldness receded. The ozone smell faded. 30, 23, 16. And then, like a switch being flipped, the sound crashed back into existence. The roar of kids yelling, the clatter of trays, the normal chaos of lunch. I opened my eyes, gasping. I was drenched in a cold sweat. The cafeteria was normal. The air was clear. The thing was gone. A few kids were looking at me funny. The teacher who had run away was nowhere to be seen. I never saw Mrs. Gable again. When I asked, they said she had taken a sudden leave of absence. But I knew what happened to those who broke the rules. After that, I was different. The comfortable numbness was gone, replaced by a hyper-vigilant awareness. I followed the rules with a religious fervor. I started to notice patterns. Things the card didn't say, the distortions, the events, they happened more often near the old wing of the school, the part that was supposed to be closed for renovations. Renovations that never seemed to start. The rules that involved that part of the building were the most severe. Rule 5. Under no circumstances are any staff or students to enter the old wing. This is not a guideline. This is a terminal directive. I started to wonder what was back there. What was the source of all this? The curiosity was a slow poison. It began to eat at me. I started staying late, grading papers in my classroom. But really I was watching, listening. The school at night was different. The silence was heavier, the shadows deeper. The clocks in the hallways seemed to tick louder, sometimes out of sync with each other, creating a discordant rhythm that set my teeth on edge. I began to map the occurrences. I kept a secret notebook, not on the school computers, not on any device, a small paper notebook I hid in my car. I noted the times of the audio lapses, the locations of the cold spots, the days when the children in 101 bits seemed more restless, when their non-existent shadows seemed to almost flicker into being for a split second. I was becoming obsessed. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't stop. The need to understand, to peel back the layers of this nightmare and see the truth at its core, was too strong. The rules were a cage, but they were also a map. They showed you where the dangerous places were, what the dangerous things were. By forbidding them so specifically, they pointed right at them. One rule in particular haunted me, Rule 40, on the last Friday of every month. A supply delivery will arrive at the loading dock at precisely 415 p.m. The delivery man will be wearing a blue uniform. You must sign for the delivery using the black pen attached to the clipboard. If the delivery man is wearing any other color, do not approach him, do not acknowledge him. Lock the loading dock door and await further instructions. But there are no further instructions listed. What happened if you saw the wrong delivery man? What was in those supplies? I had to know. It was a Thursday, the day before the last Friday of the month. I decided I was going to be there. I was going to hide near the loading dock and see what happened. It was the most reckless thing I had ever considered. A direct violation of so many rules I had lost count. But the compulsion was too strong. The next day, I faked a headache during the last period. I told the secretary I was going to lie down in the sick room for a bit before heading home. Instead, of course, my apologies. Here is the expanded and detailed section you requested. The decision to go down there felt like a physical weight in my stomach. A cold hard stone of dread and a terrible, pulling curiosity. The stairwell to the basement was separate from the main ones. A heavy metal door marked maintenance only that was usually kept locked, but I had seen the janitor, Carl, a man who never spoke and whose eyes always looked past you, use a key on it earlier in the day. I had waited until the hallway was empty and wedged a small wad of paper into the frame just above the latch. A stupid, reckless thing to do. Now, standing before it, the paper was still there. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought the sound must be echoing down the empty hall. I pushed the door open. The groan of the hinges was obscenely loud in the quiet. A long concrete staircase descended into a gloom that the weak overhead bowl did little to dispel. The air that washed up to meet me was cold and carried a distinct smell. It was the smell of damp concrete, of old dust, of something metallic like copper pennies and something else underneath it all. A faint organic scent of wet soil and things growing in the dark. I started down, each step echoing faintly. The light from above faded quickly, replaced by the dim glow of caged industrial bulbs spaced far apart along a narrow corridor. The walls down here were rough, unfinished cinder block, sweating a faint moisture, pipes bundled along the ceiling, some wrapped in peeling insulation, others bare and dripping condensation with a slow, rhythmic plink into puddles on the floor. Electrical conduits ran in parallel lines, a chaotic web of modern necessity grafted onto something much older. The further I went, the narrower the corridor seemed to become, the ceiling lower. The feeling of being buried alive was intense. I couldn't shake the image of all the school above me, the weight of it, the countless children moving through their classes directly over my head, completely unaware of what was beneath their feet. I passed a large boiler, its iron bulk silent and cold, then a series of closed doors with heavy padlocks. Markings on them I didn't understand, symbols that looked like they were scratched into the metal rather than painted. I was looking for the loading dock. I knew it was down here somewhere from the school's outdated floor plans I'd once glanced at in the main office. The silence was the worst part. It was a thick, swallowing silence, broken only by my own footsteps and the distant, maddening drip of water. It was a silence that felt deliberate, watchful. I finally found the janitor's closet just where I thought it might be. A recessed door with a simple latch lock. The lock was broken, the metal hasp bent and useless. I slipped inside. The space was cramped, claustrophobic. It was filled with the sharp, astringent smell of bleach that fought a losing battle against the basement's pervasive dampness. Mops stood in a dry bucket like skeletal soldiers. Shelves were crammed with brown bottles of cleaning agents whose labels were faded and stained. A single bare bowl hung from a wire. I didn't dare turn it on. I left the door open a crack, maybe an inch, just enough to see a sliver of the corridor outside and the heavy, riveted metal of the loading dock door directly across from me. I checked my watch, the digital numbers glowing a faint green in the dark. 410. The silence felt deeper now that I was stationary, absolute. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the frantic drum of my own pulse. I tried to breathe slowly, to be quiet, but every inhalation sounded like a gale wind to me. 412. I focused on the crack of light, on the grain of the concrete floor outside, anything to keep my mind from spiraling into panic. 413. A minute had never felt so long. I was starting to feel foolish. This was insane. What was I doing hiding in a closet waiting for a delivery man? I was risking everything for what? A glimpse of the mundane. 414. And then it happened. Right on time. A sound so foreign and out of place it made me jump. The deep guttural rumble of a large truck engine. It sounded close, right outside. The vibration traveled through the floor, up through the soles of my shoes. This was followed by the hiss of hydraulic brakes, the sound of a large vehicle settling. My mouth went dry. I pressed my eye closer to the crack. I heard the distinct clunk and scrape of a heavy bolt being thrown on the other side of the loading dock door. Then the groan of machinery as the entire door began to swing upwards. It moved slowly, lifting with a chain-driven clatter that shattered the silence. A slice of gray afternoon light flooded the corridor, so bright and real after the basement's gloom that it hurt my eyes. Dust motes danced in the sudden illumination. A man stood there, silhouetted against the light. A tall figure framed in the doorway. I held my breath. My body tensed. I couldn't see his uniform yet, just a dark shape. He stepped forward into the light, and the details resolved. I saw it. It was blue. A dark navy blue workman's uniform, crisp and clean. I felt a wave of dizzying relief, so powerful my knees actually went weak for a second. It was the right one. He was just a man, a normal-looking, middle-aged guy with a slight paunch and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a standard clipboard and turned to gesture to someone outside. I heard the rumble of a hand dolly. He wheeled it in, stacked with plain brown cardboard boxes. He worked with a quiet efficiency, stacking the boxes neatly just inside the door. 5 of them, each about 2 feet square. They were unmarked. The whole process was so normal, so utterly mundane. The thump of the boxes on the concrete, the squeak of the dolly's wheels. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment, of foolishness. Had I built this up in my head for nothing? Was I just cracking under the pressure? Was it all just a weird school with weird traditions and nothing more? The man finished stacking the boxes. He turned to leave. He was almost back to the threshold, and I was already letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, ready to slump against the wall in relieved exhaustion. But he paused. He stopped dead on the threshold, 1 foot in the light, 1 foot in the dark of the basement. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion that was utterly unnatural in its precision, he turned his head. He didn't turn his body, just his head, and he looked directly at the crack in my door, directly at me. His face was still in shadow from the cap, but the light from outside caught his lower jaw. I saw his mouth. It wasn't moving right. It stretched into a smile, but it was too wide, stretching far beyond the normal limits of a face, and it was full of too many teeth. They were small and sharp and crowded, not like human teeth at all. And his eyes, they were deep set under the cap's brim, but they weren't eyes at all. Just two dark hollows, pits that seemed to swallow the light. In a voice that was to voice, it was a dry rasp, the sound of leaves skittering across pavement, of old paper being crumpled. He spoke, and his words were not about the delivery. They were not directed at the boxes or the dolly. They were for me, meant only for me. He said, "We know you are watching. We are so looking forward to meeting you properly. The headmaster sends his regards." Then, in one fluid motion, he turned and walked away. The loading dock door immediately began to descend with a deafening rattle, cutting off the light, plunging me back into the near-total darkness of the basement. I slumped against the wall in the closet, my legs completely giving way. I slid down onto the cold, damp floor between the buckets and the mops. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones that had nothing to do with the temperature of the concrete. It was a deep, existential cold. It was to game. It was to joke. They knew. The headmaster knew. The thing that looked like a delivery man knew. I had broken the rules not by accident, but by intention. And now I was on their radar. I was seen. I stayed in that closet for a long time. I don't know how long, until the school around me was completely silent and dark. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I finally, on trembling legs, crept out. I didn't look at the boxes. I didn't touch anything. I just ran, my footsteps echoing wildly in the tunnels. I took the stairs two at a time, burst out into the empty main floor hallway, and practically ran to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. The next day at school, I expected something to happen immediately. A summons to the headmaster's office, a note in my mailbox, a look from one of the other teachers. But nothing changed. Midcrum smiled his same tired smile in the hallway and asked about my headache from the day before. The other teachers nodded hello. Everything was normal, but it wasn't. I could feel it. The air was different, charged. The rules felt heavier, more urgent. The clocks in the hallways seemed to watch me as I passed, their silent faces feeling accusatory. The children in room 101 bits seemed stiller than usual, and their lack of shadows felt more pronounced, more menacing, like the emptiness where a shadow should be was itself a presence, a thing gathering its strength. I am still here. I am still following the rules, but now I do it with a certain knowledge that it is all a performance, that I am being watched, that my compliance is being noted. The curiosity is gone, burned away by that cold fear in the basement. Now there is only the waiting, the constant looking over my shoulder, the dread of the next last Friday of the month. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want. But I know they are patient. And I know that my time here, like everyone else's who works at this strange school, is ultimately borrowed, and the lenders are finally asking for their due.